Egyptian President Abdel-Fattah el-Sisi has arrived in Russia. The Egyptian president's visit is expected to bolster ties between both nations. As well as discussing trade, the leaders will also touch on the nuclear plant currently being built by Russia. A draft treaty on partnership and strategic cooperation has already been prepared. President el-Sisi will be visiting for 2 days. Russian President Vladimir Putin will host his counterpart in his Black Sea resort. Let's get more on President el-Sisi's visit to Russia. I'm joined by CGTN's Yasser Hakim in Cairo and Lucy Taylor in Moscow. To you both, thank you for joining us on the program. Let's start with you, Lucy. Give us an update on this visit and what should we expect from the two leaders?
Well, el-Sisi is already in Russia. He's been in Moscow earlier today at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, laying a wreath in memory of all those who died during World War II. Then during the day he has a number of other events. He's speaking to Russia's upper house of parliament, which is known as the Federation Council. He's meeting the Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev before travelling down to the city of Sochi, a little further south from here, where he'll meet President Vladimir Putin. First of all, for informal talks. We're told that this evening they'll be having a more informal discussion focusing on trade and economic cooperation, particularly emphasising joint projects in things from energy, industry and agriculture. And then tomorrow, on Wednesday, there'll be more formal talks, a more formal format for open discussion of the talks between the two leaders, and then they'll be signing, we're told, a number of bilateral agreements on a number of things, in particular a presidential decree from the president approving further economic cooperation between Russia and Egypt. So from the Russian side, that's what we're hearing these two leaders will be focusing on.
Right. Yes, Egyptian officials, though, have said the visit is aimed at further boosting relations between the two nations. Do we know in detail what the two leaders are expected to discuss and perhaps what Egypt hopes to get from this?
Yes, if you talk politically first, obviously Egypt's main cooperation with Russia is in fighting terrorism. It's on the top of the talks politically, especially in Libya, because of the fallout of ISIL and Qaeda violence into other countries, neighboring countries such as Egypt over the borders and Tunisia and so forth. And obviously there is the issues in Yemen and Syria. Egypt and Russia see eye to eye on how the issues in Syria should be dealt with and restoring peace in Syria and in Yemen as well. Then you also have the Palestinian situation, and this is also going to be on the table of talks to try to restore the Palestinian Israeli peace talks. Economically, Egypt is bilateral trade with Russia is around $6.5 billion. It's mainly on the Russian, Russian exports to Egypt. Egypt's exports are only 500 million out of the 6.5 billion. So Egypt wants to increase its share of the Russian market for its exports. Also, there are talks on creating or establishing a Russian industrial zone in Egypt, and there's also talks of a Eurasian free trade area that will also include India and Egypt. So there's a host of economic and political issues that Egypt is hoping to discuss during the visit.
And Lucy, we have seen a causing of relations, though, between the two countries in the past few years. In your opinion, what is driving this increased Russian interest in Egypt?
Well, the short answer might be the economy. Russian trade, as you've just heard, is worth $6.5 billion. We heard that from the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov at the weekend to emphasise this need for further economic cooperation. And there are a number of joint projects, as your colleague was just saying, including Russia's also helping to develop a nuclear plant in Egypt as well. So the economy is important. Russia is an important trading partner for Egypt, and Russia sees Egypt's potential as a market there. There's also some mention of military cooperation, not just fighting terrorism, as was just mentioned, but probably a wider military technical cooperation. Russia has an interest in selling arms to Egypt, for example. Missile systems and fighter jets have been sold there in the past. Beyond that, though, I think there's a wider strategic importance in Egypt for Russia. As we see relations between Washington and Cairo cooling somewhat over the last few years. There have been spats over various things. The US has suspended military aid after the ousting of President Morsi in 2014. There have been other foreign aid being denied or being delayed because of human rights or because of democracy, lack of progress in progressing democracy as well. That's from the US side. And Russia sees that gap and wants to develop the influence, wants to seize the influence, seize Egypt's attention. At this moment, Russia's money, of course, doesn't usually come in the form of aid. It comes in the form of loans and financing with no strings attached. So there's definitely an opportunity there for Russia to step in with economic opportunities and also see some influence for itself politically as well.
Well, finally, to you, Yasser, though, as President el-Sisi holds talks with Putin, we know that there are unresolved issues of tourism and aviation. Moscow is yet to resume flights to Egyptian resorts. Is this a concern at all to Egypt?
Obviously, yes. What the tragic incident of the plane, the Russian plane that went down in 2015, obviously it was a sad incident, and it was also a killer blow to the tourism industry in Egypt. Because first of all, the Russian tourists were the majority of tourists that used to arrive to Egypt, to visit Egypt from around the world. And from 2010 to 2015, there was an average that exceeds 2 million Russian tourists per year that visit Egypt, and that was a predominantly large portion of the tourism that arrives to Egypt. And losing that after 2015 has been detrimental to the tourism industry here. Egypt has been trying to reach out to other markets. The Chinese have increased from 50 to 500,000, and they want to exceed to 1 million. But yet, still the Russian tourists are considered the highest and the most important for the Egyptian market. And therefore, the Egyptian president is expected to also discuss resuming charter flights from Russia to Red Sea resorts of Sharm el-Sheikh, resort cities of Sharm el-Sheikh and Hurghada and so forth, because the flights that have resumed are only to Cairo. And that means, and they are the regular flights, which don't bring too many visitors, tourists. And therefore, the resumption of charter flights, especially that Egypt has been applying all the conditions that has been requested by Russia in the last few years, as we're talking security-wise and other regulations in the airports and so forth. And Egypt has been trying to adhere to the Russian demands in order to accept to resume the flights, the charter flights back to the tourist resorts. And I think this will be also discussed, and Egypt hopes that the resumption of Russian charter flights will be soon, by hopefully next year.
Right, Yasser Hakim for us there in Cairo, and Lucy Taylor in Moscow. To you both, thank you.